Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us for this segment, we have Deleon, founder and CEO of Anatha, to discuss leveraging crypto for social good on a global scale. Ed, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thank you for having me, Jill. It's a pleasure.
All right, you got it. And tell me a bit about Anatha and your background.
Well, Anatha is really my response to what I observed over the start of the crypto emergence. At the beginning of Bitcoin specifically, there was a lot of promise of banking the unbanked and solving global poverty and solving really systemic economic problems. And while I believe that the initial push was authentic, the market more or less has seemed to get a little confused since then. And there's been a lot of self-interest involved in most of the projects that I've been a part of. And Anatha was a response to that. And I decided that since my own interests are so well taken care of, thanks to crypto, that I was in a position to launch a company that was specifically focused on solving global poverty and helping other people. And Anatha is a reflection of that. And the first use case of that technology is Project Anatha, which is an economic ecosystem which shares its contribution. Any economic activity in the system goes back to every other user in the system, which I believe is a model for pushing us forward as a civilization, but specifically for ending global poverty, as making ending global poverty as easy as installing an app specifically. And so that's what Anatha's goal is. And that's, we find ourselves mid-stride doing that. And it's a really exciting time. I'm very happy with where we're at right now. And, despite the fact that the markets are on fire today, we're still doing well. And I think crypto will continue to still do well. And we intend to ride that wave.
All right. And Ed, we're going to get to more of that in a moment here, but I want to talk about philanthropy on a higher level here. What's wrong with it? Is philanthropy another symptom of the world's troubles? Is it more of passion projects than it is, going to the core root of the issues that we're looking to solve? What are the issues here?
Well, philanthropy is really an expression of a broken system, exactly. But more notably, it's a system that's designed to create two classes, an overclass and an underclass. And philanthropy is simply the overclass using its advantageous position to sort of assuage their own guilt and concern. And if anything, philanthropy maintains the current system. So it's problematic from a systemic level. If you design an economic system properly, philanthropy is unneeded. And more importantly, it allows every participant in the system to keep their dignity, which I think is also important as a civilization. We can't have a civilization in which simply by participating in the economy, it requires you to surrender your dignity as a human. Which I think most people will relate to these days, is when you participate in the economy, it often means giving up the thing you wish to do most with your life to do the thing that you have to do. And I think that's also a symptom of a broken system. So philanthropy is simply a Band-Aid. It's not a real solution to the problem of global poverty, as evidenced by the fact that over 9 million people still die every year of hunger and hunger-related disease, despite all the philanthropic efforts of the overclass. So I think there's an opportunity here to design systems in which that's just not necessary.
For clarity here, when you say you want to spend time doing things you want to do versus what you have to do, when you mean what you have to do, like we have to go to work, like that kind of thing, like what's the difference?
Well, oftentimes, and I think a lot of people could relate to this, when you're going out into the world to decide what to do, what your life purpose is, or what you need to do, most people never get to touch that. And instead, they have to take jobs that they would never take otherwise, simply because they need to survive. They have to pay rent. I think it's roughly 50% of American households can't raise $400 in emergency cash. Most people live paycheck to paycheck, which means they don't have the opportunity to start new businesses, to move laterally into new jobs. Everyone is kind of just holding on in a state of quiet desperation. And I believe that, again, is another symptom of a broken system, where we've simply designed a system which is a treadmill going in the wrong direction, and people find themselves running faster and faster just to keep their head above water. And I think that's problematic. And I think that's a systemic problem and also evidence of a failing system. And I don't think most people would argue with me on this, though, thankfully, is that most people look out into the world and recognize that the system does not seem to have been designed with the average person in mind.
Right. So, Ed, we know what the issues are. I've yet to hear anyone put forth a plan to systemically fix it. So explain to me how Anatha is going to create crypto for social good. How are we going to realistically and scalably eradicate these kinds of issues?
Well, you create an economic ecosystem that competes with the existing economic paradigm, in which anytime a new unit of account is created, it's shared with the users of the system, which is what Project Anatha has already done as of October 2020. Now, the question is, can you plug enough users in it? Can you get enough velocity into that economic system so that it is sustainable, which is also what my work is about now, right? It's about launching new systems, new tools or use cases that leverage that economic ecosystem to expand its overall value. To use an analogy, imagine if every time the Fed Reserve ordered new units of account, new dollars to be made, instead of giving it to a small insider group, they had to share it with every citizen in the United States. If that was true, by the way, every citizen in the United States would make $1,200 a month every month for their entire lives from the moment they were born until the moment they died, which would eradicate poverty in the United States. Now, I cannot convince the Fed to take on this policy, right? There's no way for me to convince them to suddenly become that generous. What I can do is make them compete against a faster, more efficient, high velocity system that includes anyone who wishes to participate simply by installing an app. If that app is doing that same process that I described, that is to say, it's creating new units of account that have some kind of market value, and that market value, the amount that is being sent to you is $2 or more a day, well, then I just solve poverty with that application, right? So simply by going into a community and say, hi, everyone, install this application and do the things that you normally do every day. If the value that that gives that user is $2 or more a day, we could end, at the very least, extreme poverty simply by installing an app. And all the evidence suggests that once you get people above the $2 a day threshold, that they actually move into the middle class on their own. So that would have a synergistic effect. Now, the question is, what kind of system could do that? Well, Anatha is already doing that. It's producing about $6.50 a day per user. But whether or not that scales is the big question. And that's what we're going to find out over the next 5 to 10 years as we expand our ecosystem, add more users, add more use cases. But the pipes are already there. And I also like to add that this economic design is not radically experimental, that economists have been writing about it for a long time. There's a lot of really good works. Sometimes it's called a donut economy. I call it a torus-based economy. But essentially, it's when economic activity happens in the system, there's value created. In our current system, that value gets siphoned off by the inflation model. Whenever they create new US dollars, they're essentially stealing the productivity of the entire country. Instead of doing that, I'm saying give it back to them.
So let me stop you there for a moment. Where is this $2 coming from, or the $6.50 that Project Anatha is creating? Where is that coming from?
Well, the utility of the system, right? So if just like with any cryptocurrency, if users perceive that the currency is valuable, and we know that they do based on market value, right? You get a daily trading average, but that daily trading average is supported by the bare functionality, the utility, or at least the perceived utility of the cryptocurrency. So it's my job and our community's job to create that, to say, hey, this thing is valuable, let me explain why. But all cryptocurrencies go through that. Bitcoin had to go through that at the beginning. Ethereum had to go through that. Some really advanced ones are still going through it. That's simply a normal life cycle for cryptocurrency. But long term, it's a perception game. Money is the same way, though. Money is ultimately a religion. It's a belief system. The US dollar is worth something because other users believe it's worth something. So then I could go and exchange with them. Cryptocurrency is kind of the new religion, right? And all I'm saying is that in this new religion, we should probably be a little bit more egalitarian and a little bit more altruistic. And I believe that that's not only the morally highest thing we could do, but I also think it's economically efficient. I think systems that are generous, or like, for example, if you were to recreate Facebook today, and instead of saying, hey, let's give all the money to Mark Zuckerberg, what if every user on Facebook was the recipient of Facebook's profit every year, right? This is what decentralized social is making possible. That's what the future looks like. The future is going to be about shared systems. Why would you participate in a system that uses you as a product? Why would you participate in a system that is constantly siphoning value from you every day? And no one has an answer to that question, but we all have done it for our entire lives. We all give our time and energy to social media platforms during Web 2.0. We all give our time, energy, and indeed our livelihoods to the US dollar system. Most of us give 40 plus hours a week to it,
right?
And yet it's not designed to help us.
So this is basically the underpinning of Web3, right? User-based ownership. So my question to you is, and I've asked other advocates of Web3, as with all things technology-based, at some point, there are going to be investors that come in here and are going to be floating the bill. We saw it happen with Web 2, to your point. What happens if this becomes a case with Web 3? It might not be Apple, it might not be Google, but it's going to be some investor somewhere that's going to be footing the bill in some certain circumstances. So is it wholly user-based?
It can be, right? It's a competitive marketplace. My assertion is that systems that are more altruistic, that are truly decentralized, that don't have that core group that could control the entire system will be more competitive at the market. And it may take some time for the market to figure that out, right? Markets are great truth-finding mechanisms, but they also often take some time. So right now, at the first stage, I plan to see a myriad of Web3 projects that are completely VC owned, right? And they're going to teach us a lot about what works and what doesn't work with Web3. Long term, we're going to see decentralized competitors, and we're already seeing a number of those emerge right on the other side of that don't have VC money, that oftentimes raise their money using really esoteric methods that don't involve touching the legacy financial system at all, and don't involve even this idea of equity. Right? Like in order for you to control Web3, that means that there's a company that's building Web3 and some VC guy has equity in that company. The advent of decentralized autonomous organizations, which all true cryptos are powered by, means there is no equity to own. In fact, it's impossible to own the network. The same way it's impossible to own Bitcoin or Ethereum, because those are both controlled by DAOs. We're going to see Web3 based DAOs that will be very altruistic, and the only people who will be able to control them are the actual participants in the system that are actively creating Web3, that are the ones that are contributing the content or providing the infrastructure to make Web3 possible. So yes, there is a concern. There's an attack vector there that large moneyed interests will seize the future, essentially, right? Like as Web3 emerges, we'll discover that the new boss is just the old boss, right? But I also have seen quite a few projects that don't have that attack vector, that are truly decentralized autonomous organizations. And I believe that those have a competitive advantage at market simply because they don't have the profit needs that a VC run company would. There's no executive staff, there's no expensive offices, there's no marketing budget, which makes them wildly efficient. And in that ecosystem, if you create a Web3 ecosystem designed by or powered by a decentralized autonomous organization, the users of the system get to decide where the money goes. That is to say, this DAO still generates value. It's still increasing in market cap and still has units of account. But there's no executive staff to just take all the money. There's no shareholders. There's no equity. And as a result, we could start to do some really interesting things from an economic perspective, such as share the wealth. We could allow the money to distribute to every end user. And I don't think that's just a morally good thing to do. Again, I think that is also an economically expedient thing to do. That is to say, those systems will become highly efficient and very attractive to the end user. If you made a Facebook clone today that just followed this model, why would you use the old Facebook when the other one is paying you to use it? Right? Assuming equal functionality. But the truth is, you're going to see greater functionality in decentralized autonomous organizations because the smartest people in the tech field now are moving into decentralized systems, right?
To see how it could potentially reshape the global capital markets if you go along with that theory and it executes on itself. But Ed, in the last minute that we have together here, what areas of the world do you see benefiting most if we put this crypto for good theory into practice? Who benefits the most?
Well, right off the bat, any remittance market benefits dramatically from any use of cryptocurrency. That is to say, if you're using the legacy financial system's pipes to move money from a first world nation into a third world nation, you'll discover that is a very expensive and time intensive operation. If you're using any crypto, that suddenly vanishes, and it goes from waiting multiple days and paying 20% for a transaction to waiting a few seconds and costing a fraction of a penny for a transaction. That's incredibly powerful for a community where most of the money coming into that community is perhaps from remittances. That will increase the velocity of money and also just free them from the tyranny of a remittance organization. That's the low-hanging fruit. Long term, though, I think we're really going to start to see a synergistic effect as first world nation participants, such as myself, and third world nation participants start to live in the same economic soup. Currently, we're siloed, right? The United States is siloed away from most third world nations, and it's to the third world nations' detriment, but also to our detriment. We don't realize that that's lost economic activity. Those are lost trade partners. That's lost productivity overall. long-term, information age economies don't have geographic borders. So it's not about where are they? They're everywhere. They're around us. They're in the United States right now. There are people in the United States right now living below the poverty line who don't have access to basic finance. They're not allowed to open a bank account, or they can't get access to capital the way most people can. So it's going to be everywhere, right? But first, it will be developing nations, and you could see this by crypto's adoption curve in certain countries like Colombia or Turkey, where crypto adoption is much higher. It's much higher there because they need it more. It's more apparent, but we need it here in first world nations. The United States and any developed nation can also benefit from cryptocurrency. That's why it's the fastest growing industry on the planet. So it's not about where, it's more about who, right? Like, who wants to benefit from it? Anyone who chooses to, or anyone who has that need. The parable here is that the future doesn't show up everywhere at once. It shows up in individuals, right? And then it radiates outward. I'm fortunate enough to live in the future already. I benefit tremendously from it. And a lot of other people are figuring that out. And that's why you're seeing people move into crypto as rapidly as they can, even even when things are scary, like today, when the market looks like it's a bloodbath, user adoption still continues on that same curve. So it's only a matter of time now, right? There's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And crypto is a really powerful idea.
Right. And we see this with each iteration of technology, just how quickly it catches on compared to the last generation. Ed, that's our time for today. We appreciate you joining us, and thanks for joining me on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Jill. Aloha.